The authorship of Shakespearean plays, theories and skepticisms. We will talk about what started the suspicion against Shakespeare, theories of who may be the true author, reasons for skepticisms, modern Shakespearean skeptics, and those who believe Shakespeare's authorship is genuine. What started the suspicion? In 1781, Reverend J. Wilmot was on a search for Shakespearean records. What he found led him to believe that Shakespeare was not the true author of Shakespearean attributed plays. Many others followed in his footsteps and reached the same conclusion. In this presentation, we will discuss the major theories about Shakespearean authorship. Alternative authors to Shakespearean plays. The Baconian theory was the first theory to take root against Shakespeare's authorship. People who believed that Francis Bacon was truly Shakespeare believed that Shakespeare could have not been intelligent enough to author the plays, and that whoever truly wrote the Shakespearean plays had to have a knowledge of the law. Francis Bacon was believed by the Baconians to be the true author because he was a lawyer, and they thought that perhaps due to the pressure from his parents to do well, he wrote in secret. Baconians also believed that Bacon had adopted the name William Shakespeare to avoid getting caught and to avoid drama. The Oxford theory is a theory that is for Edward de Vere, the second Earl of Oxford. A schoolmaster named Looney of Gateshead presented this claim. He believed that whoever wrote Shakespearean plays was Italian or had the knowledge of an Italian way of living. They chose the 17th Earl of Oxford based on the similarities between Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis and a poem by Oxford. The Derby theory was first presented by a French professor named Lefranc. He believed that Love's Labour's Last, a play attributed to Shakespeare, could have only been written by a resident of the court of Navarre in Iraq around 1583. He believed that William Stanley, the sixth Earl of Derby, was a likely candidate. The only issue was that there was no evidence that ever showed William Stanley taking up residence in Iraq. Lefranc gave up his research, and a man named Dr. Tytherley took up his research and published his works in 1952. He came to the conclusion that Stanley paid William Shakespeare to be the surrogate owner of his plays. The Marlowe theory is the youngest theory of all. A man named Calvin Hoffman found parallels between Christopher Marlowe's work and Shakespeare's work. He believed that Marlowe was the true author based on the similarities. The only issue that was wrong with this one was that Marlowe had died in 1593, before any of the Shakespearean plays were even written. What was the solution? Well, it's possible that Marlowe's death may have been a hoax to avoid arrest or death, and he believed that Marlowe took up residence in northern Italy and sent his writings back to Shakespeare to write down and have performed in the theater. Next, we will discuss some common reasons for Shakespearean skepticisms among theorists. One of the biggest claims made against Shakespeare was that he may have been illiterate and that his daughters may have been illiterate. There is also evidence that no records or materials were found that would paint Shakespeare as a poet or a playwright. There is also the fact that there was a lack of praise among his contemporaries, one including his own son in law. There's also the fact that he may have been just a pseudonym and that there was no real William Shakespeare. Next, we will take a look at some quotes made by modern Shakespearean skeptics against William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon. Mark Twain, Arthur, said the following: "We are the reasoning race, and when we find a vague file of chipmunk tracks stringing through the dust of Stratford village, we know by our reasoning powers that Hercules has been along there. I feel that our fetish is safe for 3 centuries yet." Robin Williams, an actor, said, "You think about William Shakespeare. You think a man basically with a second-grade education wrote some of the greatest poetry of all times? I think maybe not." Henry James said, "I am haunted by the conviction that the divine William is the biggest and most successful fraud ever practiced on a patient world." Malcolm X, a civil rights leader, said, "Another hot debate I remember I was in had to do with the identity of Shakespeare. The King James translation of the Bible is considered the greatest piece of literature in English. They say that from 1604 to 1611, King James got poets to translate, to write the Bible. Well, if Shakespeare existed, he was then the top poet around. But Shakespeare is nowhere reported connected with the Bible. If he existed, why didn't King James use him?" Next, we will take a look at the belief that Shakespeare's authorship is genuine. Stratfordians, or people who believe Shakespeare is the true author, believe that a man named William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon, who was born April 15, 64, was also William Shakespeare the actor, William Shakespeare the gentleman, and also a playwright and poet named William Shakespeare. Many people who are against Shakespeare's authorship believe that Shakespeare couldn't have possibly have written some of his plays because his name was not included on them. But Stratfordians say that contemporary plays were not considered literature, so people did not pay attention to their authors, and authors did not think it necessary to put their names on it. They also say that there is no real concrete proof against Shakespeare. Every theory is just simply a theory. There is also the point that William Shakespeare was indeed an actor at a theater company. He was often the lead man in many plays, and he is also documented on cast lists, folios, and diaries of other poets and playwrights that he met with and had performed plays with. Despite the numerous attempts to answer the Shakespearean authorship question, it still remains. Why? Well, because there have only been theories thus far. No one has any concrete proof, and no one really knows the answers but those who were involved in writing the plays. Despite the standing question, we can still enjoy these plays, and it is up to the reader to decide whether this affects their view of Shakespearean attributed plays.